So let's begin.
Part 1. Top, bottom, right, left.
Why? On the left. When? On the bottom. Which? On the top. Where? On the bottom. Why? On the left. Who? On the right. Which? On the right. Why? On the left. Who? On the bottom. When? On the top. How? On the right. Where? On the left. When? On the top. Who? On the bottom. Why? On the right. Which? On the bottom. What? On the left. How? On the bottom. What? On the top. Which? On the left. How? On the top. Where? On the right. Who? On the left. Where? On the right. What? On the top. How? On the left. When? On the top.
Part 2. Top right, top left, bottom right, bottom left.
Where? On the bottom left. When? On the top left. Who? On the bottom right. Which? On the top right. Why? On the bottom left. Who? On the bottom right. How? On the top left. When? On the top right. How? On the bottom left. What? On the bottom left. Why? On the top right. Where? On the top left. Which? On the bottom right. Where? On the bottom left. How? On the top right. What? On the top left. Who? On the top left. When? On the top right. Which? On the top left. What? On the bottom left. Why? On the top right. When? On the bottom left. Who? On the top right. How? On the top left. Which? On the top right. What? On the bottom right. Why? On the bottom left. Where? On the bottom right.
Part 3. Mixed positions.
Which? On the bottom left. How? On the top left. Where? On the bottom right. Who? On the right. Why? On the bottom left. What? On the top right. When? On the top. Where? On the top right. Who? On the bottom. Which? On the top left. When? On the top right. Who? On the top. What? On the left. Why? On the top right. Which? On the right. Where? On the top right. Who? On the bottom. What? On the right. How? On the top right. Which? On the top left. Where? On the left. Why? On the bottom right. When? On the right. How? On the top left. What? On the top right. How? On the bottom right. When? On the top. Why? On the right.